Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I am Liz Erlewine, former visual arts director here at Crooked Tree Art Center. This morning, I was able to come over for this very special presentation, and as I was greeting some of my friends, I said, well, hey, why don't I don a volunteer tag and introduce today's speaker. So thank you for letting me get up in front of this crowd one more time and speak to those of you online and here in this room. It's really nice to be here. So Coffee at 10 is a program that Crooked Tree Art Center has been doing for many years. When I was visual arts director, I made a change to make it a weekly program run in conjunction with the exhibitions that are on display. So I cannot take credit, however, for fully realizing the exhibitions that are currently on display, and I cannot take credit for this amazing lineup of speakers this season. But it is a true pleasure for me to get to spontaneously introduce you to this amazing speaker today, because we get to welcome Alissa Seelmann-Rutkofske. Alissa is the gallery coordinator here at Crooked Tree Art Center, and when I was on staff, she was my right-hand person. So it's always a pleasure to get to work creatively with Alissa, thinking through the visual considerations that go into exhibitions, as well as the conceptual considerations as we're thinking about drawing connections between different works and drawing connections to ideas and even the history that ties into how we are looking at images. Alissa has a background in art history and a background in photography, and she's going to tell you a little bit more specifics about that. I did not come prepared to do this intro today, but I can speak to you from the heart that Alissa knows what she's talking about, and that the things that we're going to look at in this very brief history of photography today are threads that run through all of the way that we consume visual material today. So I'm really grateful that you're here with me today to start this conversation. I think it will open some doors for how we look at the work on display. And with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to the one and only Alissa.
Thank you, Liz. Welcome to Coffee at 10, as Liz said, I'm Alissa Seelmann-Rutkofske. Coffee at 10 presentations would not exist without our visual presenting sponsor, Comfort Keepers, who support our exhibitions, or without Roast and Toast, who provide the titular coffee. So please, if you're here, make sure you get some coffee and some pastries. They're delightful. If you've come to a lot of Coffee at 10s, you've probably noticed me stationed in the back, running the tech. Somehow I found the wrong podium and I had to stay here. I have a degree in art history and an interest in photography. So we thought that this would be a great opportunity to dive into the origin story of photography using our Juried Photography show as kind of a guiding roadmap. Just a quick asterisk here, this is only an hour-long presentation. I will not be able to cover the entirety of photography unless I fuel it up with like 1 or 2 extra cups of roast and toast, nor will I be able to talk about all 48 pieces that are featured in that show. Identity Maps is a lovely show. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it features 29 artists. Definitely check it out. I would highly encourage you do so before it closes on November 2nd. That is missing a slide, but that is okay. Photography begins, as with most things, with Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci writes about the camera obscura in his Codex Atlanticus in 1515. Now, camera obscura exists prior to Da Vinci. There are plenty of documentations by Chinese philosopher Matsu in 400 BCE, Arab philosopher Ibn al-Haytham in 1021, and it is even believed that naturally occurring camera obscura influenced Paleolithic cave drawings. And this is actually, it's really hard to find images from Da Vinci's Codex Atlanticus, but this is just a sketch of how he proposed this was used. And this is all coming from his study on the eye. Oh, that is out of order. We're gonna just skip that. Camera obscura Camera obscura, which translates to dark room, is essentially a dark room or box with a small hole on one side and a light-sensitive surface on the opposite. The hole allows the light to pass into the box, distorts the rays of light, and then projects an inverted image on the light-sensitive surface. This is a project from UK artist Hannah Imla. We do not have any of her work in the galleries here, but I thought this was a really easy way to kind of see how camera obscura works. You can see the horizon in the background. She creates these foldable, portable camera obscuras and takes them out into the environment. Plenty of artists historically have used camera obscura to solve issues of perspective and composition. Some are a little more secretive than others. Some notable names are Canaletto and Rembrandt. Both are believed and have been documented to use camera obscura for preliminary sketches. Another famous one is Johannes Vermeer. He is believed by most historians to have used camera obscura to create his ultra detailed pieces. The music lesson for my money, painted in 1662, is probably the easiest way to see this illustration, simply because the precision of the perspective. This image, by the way, is not one that I created. This is a diagram from essentialvermeer.com, but it does a really good job of showing how all of the crisp lines and all of those details actually line up. Okay, so camera obscura in these early days is just a temporary tool. There was no way to permanently fix the image to a surface. Enter Joseph Niepce. Niepce was a French inventor born in 1765. This is Joseph on the right here, and one of his experiments where he copied the image of an engraving to a pewter plate using photographic methods. He was interested in lithography, but admittedly did not have the artistry to create the drawings necessary. So he started looking for a workaround using a variety of photosensitive materials and techniques. Niepce created negative accidentally using a silver chloride solution on paper, but was then unsuccessful in utilizing it in the way that we use negatives today. So he continues, he persists, and continues to throw many combinations of chemicals and surfaces until eventually he places a pewter plate coated in bitumen of Judea, which is essentially a naturally occurring asphalt that hardens in light. He places that plate in a camera obscura, exposes it for 8 hours, and washes it in lavender and petroleum oil, and voila. The world's first direct positive and first permanent photo. This is view from window at Le Gras. This is 1826, so the very first photo, 1826. His friends called the process heliography, which translates to sun writing. And so from here, we kind of see a big boom. I think in the early 1800s, there was a really big interest all at once for photography and the results of photography. So we see probably about 20 to 30 different people who eventually try and claim to have invented photography. After Niepce, Louis Daguerre, who already found success creating 3D diagrams, and this is the, a diorama. This is a diagram of one of his dioramas, was already experimenting with camera obscura when Niepce successfully created his heliograph. The pair were introduced somewhat clandestinely by a Parisian maker of camera obscuras and signed a contract in 1829 in which Daguerre promised to give Niepce a better camera obscura, and Niepce promised to give Daguerre the process that he had created for producing his heliographs. Both parties do honor that agreement, though Daguerre later admitted that the camera obscura he gave Niepce was ineffective. Niepce died shortly after this exchange in 1833. But Daguerre continues his research, and by 1837 has devised a more stable, less time-consuming process. the daguerreotype. The daguerreotype needed a highly polished copper plate, highly polished copper sheet plated in silver. The silver side of the plate is exposed to iodine fumes, which fuse to create light-sensitive silver iodine. The plate is then placed in the camera obscura and exposed to the light. The earliest exposure times are about 4 to 5 minutes. These come down to about 20 seconds at the least. The plates were then introduced to mercury fumes to reveal the latent image. And then, because the plate is still light sensitive at this time, it is washed with a salt solution and water. One of the first results is shown here. This is Daguerre's still life interior of a cabinet of curiosities. This is 1839, I believe. And then in pretty quick succession after that, he announces the camera and the technology, and a big boom of technological advances kind of follow that. One of which is British scientist John Herschel. He heard about daguerreotype and, without really knowing the process, reproduced its effects in 1839. He was a little bit more skilled than Daguerre and had an idea of what was happening, but didn't really need to have his exact process to be able to reproduce it. He showed his results to the Royal Society in London and called them photographic specimens. From then on out, photography became the general term for the medium. Herschel is responsible for another notable moment in photographic history. He continued his photographic experiments with the use of the aim of using vegetable dyes and iron salts to create color photographs. And he succeeds in the cyanotype. And this is one of his first from 1842 over here on the right. Herschel championed the democratic potential of photography. Its accessibility as both a consumer and a producer of art opened many doors, specifically in middle class. A step beyond that, cyanotype simplicity and low cost made it an easy entrance to the arts. Cyanotype was adopted in several other fields, like biology, as illustrated here by Anna Atkins. She created books of cyanotypes where this one in the center is a type of algae. And then the photo on the left here is a French photographer, Henri Lessec, who was part of an 1850s effort to complete a photographic survey of French architecture. So the original photo is taken in 1850 using a daguerreotype. However, later in life, he began to worry that he would lose all of his work due to fading. And so he transposed and reprinted all of his works in a cyanotype. So this is actually an 1870 reprint. And in our show, in identity maps, you'll see that cyanotypes continue to be a popular application. This is Graham Cassano's piece, The Mathematical Sublime. Cassano says, I use large format negatives and alternative printing methods to create experimental assemblages that disrupt spatial patterns through distortion, effacement, and dislocation. To my eye, Cassano's use of cyanotype and all of the differential textures and depths creates almost a sense of haunted nostalgia. So not everyone was in love with the democratic photography. Many artists, notable or aspiring, took issue with the new medium. Gustave Courbet was a prominent French realist, and he said that art is derived from imagination, judgment, and feeling, but photography was mere reproduction, which cheapened the products of the beautiful. And he wasn't alone in this criticism. It's pretty clear if you look it's pretty clear that most of the pushback comes from a place of defensiveness, especially if we look at the major art movements of the time. First up, we have neoclassicism, which is characterized by realistic representations, often referencing ancient Greek or Roman myths or stories, in the hopes that their virtues would improve the viewer. Neoclassicists often use their work for social protests, like David's Death of Marat, who is a murdered French revolutionary leader. That's on the left there. And to illustrate the ideal. On the flip side of that, we have Romanticism, which praised emotion and the power of nature. Romantic artists generally use stronger colors and were less restrained with their brushstrokes. Like Neoclassicism, Romanticism aimed to create realistic depictions. Unlike Neoclassicism, Romanticism's subject matters are not limited by the seen world. Despite their differences in attitude, both art forms have a reliance on giving the viewer something recognizable. And throughout art history, this is true up until this point. Art's purpose was to capture and communicate a thought, idea, scene, moment in a way that the written word could not. The advent of photography with its popularity and relative ease challenged this and pushed art as a whole to reconsider what it was. Impressionism is born from this moment of self-reflection and represents the internal battle against what was and what now. The movement accepts that photography is the best way to accurately, realistically render a subject so they don't have to. Artists were freed up to explore color and light and movement and the fleeting nature of the moment. Impressionism paves the way for Fauvism, Expressionism, Cubism, and Surrealism, but photography paved the way for Impressionism. Now, I know you're thinking, Alissa, this is supposed to be about photography, and I hear you, I'm coming back. Okay, so technological advances were fast and furious. Improvements in materials and processes led to better results with less exposure time and with more ease in production. Some examples, William Henry Fox Talbot creates a cheaper method in the calotype. Gustave Le Gray and Frederick Scott Archer gave us a wet collodion, which was faster and made it easier to produce. Louis Savard invented the first commercially available way to print on paper, albumin paper. Maddox and Bennett give us a gelatin silver prints, which is essentially adopted by Kodak. Platinum prints, which were cheaper and more accessible than silver, come from Galen. And a single lens reflex camera, SLR, came from Thomas Sutton. All of this happens in 60 years, from 1840 to 1900. We have all of these advancements. One of the most important, probably, arguably, color photography. And it happens earlier than you think. From the beginning of photographic history, there's been a tie between photography and science. One of the first fields to really adopt and use photography as a tool is science and biology. And the pursuit of color is no different. Color photography was initially created for scientific purposes, first by physicist James Clerk Maxwell, here on the right. He developed a 3-color system, and then a subtractive method by Louis Archer de Horan in 1865. The subtractive method developed by de Horan was the founding technology behind Kodachrome, the first commercially available film. Eastman Kodak had produced the first Kodak camera, a camera made for the casual middle-class families, in 1888. The camera came loaded with film, which was paper-coated with a light-sensitive material and with about 100 exposures. And when the consumer finished the film, the entire camera was sent back and then developed by Kodak. Kodachrome was introduced in 1935, first as a 16mm moving image film, and then as a 35mm film in 1936. Color photography as a whole would not be utilized in serious fine art, capital F, fine art, until a century after its advent. Somewhat famously, Kodak did try to persuade some prestigious photographers like Ansel Adams, Paul Strand, and Edward Weston to use their product. And while they did begrudgingly, most people continued to work in black and white because of the serious nature. So in identity maps, we have these pieces from Christopher Casper. Christopher creates his pieces and identity maps by scanning analog photos. And for my money, this is probably a Kodachrome film, but not confirmed. He says, I am interested in the images from our past that make statements about current issues, or images that speak to me on an aesthetic level. One's modern identity is often considered new and unlike the past, but these images show that the same identity of how one chooses to live, work, and play has always been there. We are not living in a modern new age, but maybe we are just choosing to see, acknowledge, and accept our identities. Photojournalism, excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink of water. Actually, coffee, not water. All right, while fine art is slow to adopt color photography, photojournalism kind of leads the charge. Photojournalism is probably the most ubiquitous use of photography in our everyday lives, covering everything from war to sports. As early as the Civil War, photojournalists have been documenting and reporting. Though the genre gets its start in wars and moves quickly into all other areas of life. And as magazines start to boom in the 1920s, so does the need for photojournalism to communicate to the public. This is an image by Dorothea Lange, who is my favorite photographer. Dorothea was one of several photographers employed by the FSA, part of the WPA New Deal during the Great Depression, to portray rural poverty. And if you notice, so this is an unemployed lumber worker. That's his social security number tattooed on his arm. Photojournalism doesn't need to be heavy though. This was likely taken on Kodak's K1 camera, the first commercially available model. And this is just an action shot of a fencing match in 1896. And this is a piece from Gretchen Dorian, who is featured in Identity Maps and has been a great friend to Cricketry for many years. Gretchen has made a career out of photographing boats on the water, both in the summer and in the winter. This photo illustrates how two 50-foot sailboats approach a buoy that they both must round. She says, in order to do this, each member of the crew has a job. It becomes a truly dynamic relationship to watch this ballet be orchestrated by each boat's crew. And then pictorialism marks a departure from the documentary style of photojournalism and a push towards a more artistic aesthetic. Sorry. Henry Peach Robinson suggested that the use of effects and manual interference gave the works more artistic value to the same level and rose them to the same level of painting. Images would be manipulated to create glowing light effects, softness, and even the addition of brushstrokes were added. So this is a piece that is featured in Identity Maps by Daryl Dingus. Daryl says, my relationship with nature, especially the lush land filled with flowers and trees and warmth from the Leo sun, continue to nurture me and bring me peace. I feel safe and free in these gardens of outdoor rooms within the paths and spaces defined and bound by my nature's beauty. And another kind of example of pictorialism here is Raymond Gaynor's Enjoying the Secluded Beach. Ray says, art as self-expression transcends time and place. When offered to the public, it is an open forum to both convey and invite personal engagement and subjective emotion. For as long as I can remember, photography has been and continues to be my driving passion, a mesmerizing journey down an eclectic path of joy, discovery, therapy, wonder, and learning. So, and you might be sensing a trend here, right? So straight photography is a direct response to pictorialism's loose relationship with truth. And so this push and pull of how much do we interfere with the image versus how much do we just let the image speak is kind of a constant throughout photography. Straight or pure photography focuses on clearly capturing unaltered, crisp, clear images using the camera's technology. While both movements have an adherence to beauty, straight photography utilizes high contrast, sharp focus, and an aversion to cropping. So the aim at straight photography is just to give you the beauty of nature as it exists. That's not to say that they don't use darkroom to make these more appealing, right? So there's a lot of things that they do to increase the contrast and to make them crisper. They're just not putting their hand as much as the pictorialists. And some examples, from our show Identity Maps. This is from AJ Jensen, US 41 stumps number 5. AJ says stumps are a threshold, the line between the human world and the wild. They represent the taming of vast wilderness surrounding small towns. And I actually like that this feels almost like an advancement in time from Ansel Adams' Redwoods that we just saw on the previous screen here. So compositionally, this just kind of feels like a remark about industrialization almost. And then we also have Stone Pang, Explorer number 1. Stone says, every landscape has its own life and meaning, depending on the viewer's mood. I try to catch that emotional feeling at a specific moment in landscape, using the Chinese philosophy of life and the aesthetic principles, less is more and empty is full, in creating my images. Using primarily white tones in the backgrounds lends a simplicity and ethereal purity to a subject that gives you a calm, peaceful, infinitely deep and immeasurable feeling. The empty space offers the viewer a peaceful feeling and a chance to focus on what it really takes to find balance in life and capture a little piece of it for ourselves. So straight photography, photojournalism, documentary photography kind of exists for a while. There's also a fair amount of experimental photography that's happening during this time. We're not going to really talk about that because we don't have many examples of it in our identity maps, which, as you remember, is what is guiding our talk today. So in the mid-1970s, a group of photographers were brought together under the exhibition New Topographics, Photographs of a Man-Altered Landscape. The show continues to have a lasting effect on American landscape photography. Topographics often juxtapose natural scenes with obsolete man-made structures. Where Ansel Adams emphasized wild, untamable nature, the new topographics challenged the untouchability of nature by focusing on urban spread and sprawl and urban decay. And so this is another lasting impact. I think you could definitely make an argument about ruin porn being an offshoot of the new topographics. Some examples of topographic photography in our identity maps. One comes from Elizabeth Cambridge. This is Explorer number 1. Elizabeth says, I am drawn to abandoned buildings, particularly windows and doors that were once part of place, crucial to human interaction as points of contact. Without human interaction, windows and doors lose purpose, becoming more like barriers with no hint of the lives they once hold. And this photo actually speaks to me on a lot of levels. I grew up in a very rural part of Michigan, and after the 2008 recession, a lot of farmlands and structures like this became abandoned and kind of were left to be rewilded. And so this was something that was really common for me growing up and feels very nostalgic almost. Speaking of nostalgia. Another example in our show Identity Maps comes from John Puffer. This is Nostalgia, Lawrenceville, Illinois. And he has maybe the most succinct statement about his piece, and I think it's really on point. John says, my practice looks to the past, the abandoned, and the lost, and the relationship to the future. All right, and then so the last real subject that I wanted to touch on, and I kind of cruised through that first part, so sorry about that, is aerial photography. Aerial photography starts way earlier than you think it does, and is maybe one of the newer frontiers that we're looking at now. So that's kind of why I wanted to bookend with it. The first aerial photo was taken by Nadar in 1858 using wet collodion and a balloon. And this is him on the right here. This is not him in the air, believe it or not. This is a staged photo in his studio. Nader is kind of a character and did some of these staged photos, much to the delight of the public. It was realized very early on the advantages of aerial photography and map making and military applications. Military weaponized drones overshadowed the many other drone applications until rather recently when commercially available drones hit the market. I would say that drone photography is in its infancy at the moment in fine art applications. While aerial photography has existed for about as long as photography. I did not put the date here, but this is one of Nadar's photos from I believe it's 1865. And that is the streets of Paris. Fine art has been slow to embrace new technologies just traditionally, and that includes drones. Just as an aside, because I think it's cool and I can. If you have a chance to read about Nadar, I would highly recommend it. He was a storyteller with his hands in so many things. He was interested in all the new technologies and was just a constant showman. This is a revolving self-portrait. And so if you're familiar with the moving images, not film, moving images, so the horse galloping, this is a version of that where he took, I think it's about 15 stills and then put them in the machine and runs, and this is what you get. Okay, back to drones. We have several amazing examples of drone photography in the exhibition. This first one here is by Donovan Ox. This is Charlevoix Pier Lighthouse. Donovan says his eyes have been set on the sky and seeing nature from a different perspective. With the aid of a drone, I can take a glimpse of the broader horizons and see how things are connected on a larger scale. And then we also have Cameron Wilcox, Fishing for Stars. Cameron says his photographs are a map of the places he visits that he can return to again and again, and then also to return to document how they change in shifting light and weather. He says, I know that there are many significant artisan movements. Oh, no, that's me, sorry. I like in both of these pieces that we have just the different perspective, but also they're not technically map making, right? They're not technically doing that, but they kind of harken back to that. And I think especially in a way that's really abstract in the cracks in the ice here, that is really, really nicely done. And now I know that there are many significant artists and movements that have been omitted here, but I did really want to use the photos in the show to kind of guide this talk. Portraits are critically important to photography and to art. We didn't have any portraits in this exhibition, and so we didn't talk about them. We also have abstractions and surrealists. Man Ray and Mapplethorpe are big and significant figures that I think we could definitely explore, could have definitely explored. But I wanted to really adhere to and honor the exhibition that we created here. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free. I did just want to end on this quote from Dorothea Lange. Photography takes an instant out of time, altering life by holding it still. And there's a lot of just discourse about what photography is and how it exists. Is it capturing beauty? Is it capturing truth? Is it capturing a moment? How much of the photographer is in the photograph in the end piece? And so I think relative history of photography, it's only been 200 years versus, thousands of years of art history in general. And so photography is still trying to find its legs. And I think in all of that, these discussions about what makes it an art and what makes it worthy are always interesting. And I think Dorothea Lange does a really good job of just saying that, like, regardless of what it is, we as a photographer are responsible for finding a moment and just holding it there. And so what was current, what is the moment now, then just immediately becomes part of the past. That is a frozen moment that we can go back to. And that is it. Is there any questions? We have some time to fill. Go ahead.
Going that anybody can really produce great
Yeah.
pictures now.
Yeah.
Everywhere used to be a professional photographer. If you went to a photo show
Mhm.
or see some photos, done very professional, especially the film
Mhm.
versus now that there's so many things and ways to create a good picture.
Yeah. I was really hoping someone would ask me a question like this. Okay, so I'm a bit of an anarchist when it comes to this. So my answer is going to differ than some other people in the room. But I think that with each inception of new tools, right? So I'm thinking cell phones in particular, make it super easy for people to be able to capture great images that are certainly worthy, and drones and those new technologies. And then even if you want to talk about AI and bringing that into the picture, I think there's always a fear and an apprehension about what do those new technologies mean for me as an established photographer, right? There's photography as a whole becomes challenged by these, and any art would be challenged by them. But I think eventually what's going to happen is that we just have to accept that these are tools and figure out how to use them in our advantages. I think even with a cell phone or a drone or any other new tool, you still have to rely on your basic principles of design to be able to create an image that's going to be seen as fine art. And whether you know you're doing that or not, right? Some people have an inherent sense of what composition looks like, how to establish lights and darks. Whether you're knowing that or not, you can still use those things to create images that I think are just going to be as worthy as film photography and large format cameras. Yeah. Penny.
I was a kid,
Mhm.
you took the picture, you took the film out, and you took it, you sent it in
Mhm.
to your, drugstore, and then bring it back and you have your prints.
Mhm.
Nowadays, all my photos are on my phone.
Mhm.
I'm not printing.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
That's a really good question. I think just the way that we consume things is a little bit different, and I think if we're talking about, digital versus film, and that's really what the difference comes down to, right? Is we have this ease of photography and ease in digital that we didn't have with film. So with film, you have to be really precious about the moments, and you have 36 shots on this, and we need to, like, this is what I'm trying to get. Like with a digital thing, you can just kind of snap, 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 snap. And one of those is probably going to hit, but with a film, it's a little bit harder to commit to those shots. So I think part of that is that we just have an overabundance of pictures. The other part of that is that I don't know, like I print photos for myself, maybe like once a year, like for just like keepsake photos and fine art things as needed. But I think that just as a general thumb, we don't consume media in a printed way anymore. And so it feels less important to have that physical thing. I think that, at some point as a society, we're going to have to reckon with the fact that digital repositories are not permanent and there's going to be some loss there. But for the time being, it feels like all of those things are safe. Even if we don't know where they are, they exist somewhere and we can find them eventually. But at some point, those are going to be, we're going to have some loss. And, this is kind of off on a tangent, but like this also kind of speaks to, conservation and art in general. The idea that we need to make everything permanent is not necessarily the right idea. And so losing some of those things and letting them be enjoyed, however that is, and then letting them fall away. That's just a natural part of what exists in life. Anyone else?
No.
I know you do.
I'm interested in hearing what you're sharing about photography as we sit in this exhibition of watercolors.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about, the two shows happening simultaneously. And as I look around the room, I mean, a vast majority, or at least half, are responding and having a dialogue with photography. I'm just curious in hearing what you think about that. And
Yes.
kind of photography's relationship with all these different media.
Yes, I think that the relationship between just really photography and painting and photography and other art forms is a constant give and take, whether or not artists want to acknowledge that, right? And some people are really hesitant to say that, my photo, my painting is influenced by this other media because of the purity of it. But I think like there's some really easy examples. So like this right here, let's see. M185 by Carol Eunice Nielsen. This is just a clear reference to Impressionism, which is directly born from photography. But we also have examples of like crop. Crop is something that we don't really see prior to photography. So photographic crop is when you're lining up your photo, and instead of putting everything in the photo and centering it, you have to make decisions about what gets in that frame. And so this Let's Row by Michael Engel over here, you can see examples of that. So like the boats are clearly situated in the frame, but you don't see either of the boats fully. So like that's just an influence from photography. That's pretty clear. And then you can also see some of the crop in the portraits over here. Particularly, I'm sorry to the online viewers. I don't have the man over here. He's looking away from the frame. His arm is up and like in a kind of an immediacy gesture. So there's this idea of action, and he's cut out. So yeah, no, I think it's really interesting to look at the different ways that photography is influencing the the main mediums, right? So photography kind of feels like and has felt like the little brother in the fine arts world, right? So it's still at this moment in time, it's considered a fine art with capital F, but it's kind of secondary, right? I think painting still kind of holds that #1 spot for most people as what you think of when you think of fine art, and then photography is a little lesser than. And so the idea that photography has an influence in that other way, it's not just the give and the take, I think is really, really interesting.
So I do collages.
Yeah.
From my
Yeah,
but it's altered my
yeah.
photography because I sometimes take pictures.
Mhm.
Maybe not great pictures, but it might be clouds or something that I want, because I cut them up in pieces
Mhm.
and use those pieces. Sometimes instead of just taking photography for the photo, I do it for
For the greater good.
what I'm going to use later.
Yeah, yeah. And that is certainly a wider practice, right? Like photography as collage or photo manipulation in that way. I don't think, not to my knowledge anyway, in the other exhibition we had any examples of those, but the idea of putting pieces together to make something that's kind of like for the greater good, that kind of speaks, I think, to the democracy of photography a little bit.
Is sort of that, that's that kind of. It's not in the
Yeah,
exhibit.
early example, the dimensional.
Oh, right, yes.
Color one.
Yeah, Graham Casano, the cyanotype.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I suppose you're right. That is technically kind of a collage application. And Graham uses large format and alternative processing to really create these pieces. And I don't remember specifically, but I know that he has two pieces in the show and they're both site specific. And so all of the images featured here are in one spot. So this is kind of trying to tell the story of this location through these different lenses all at the same time.
I think this is a great example for my next question, which is sort of off of what Penny was saying. So like, I think about how we just consume images almost more than words now, and we are engaged with that screen. And when I talk with photographers who are working in gallery spaces, we're transitioning into a world of objecthood quite frequently, when a lot of the photographers we might work at Crooked Tree with aren't thinking about that object at the time of image making. Can you talk a little bit about that, like the choices either that you see in the show there, or how you approach that, or what?
Yeah. So there's actually a couple really good examples of that, this being one of them, and then Liz Barrick Fall's series of 4 pieces. I don't have an image of that series here, but Liz's piece essentially, she's printed her photos on fabric and has embroidered their black and white photos and has embroidered red into them to kind of highlight some areas. And then further, she takes and frames those pieces in driftwood and has them kind of like stretched almost like a tanned leather on those frames. So I think, when you're starting out in photography, presentation becomes one of those things that I don't know that you necessarily think about, but you should, right? So if you're going to be showing in a gallery, you have your photo and it's a great photo, but how do you make it stand out? How do you make it look professional? How do you make it convey what you want it to convey, right? Because if you pick the wrong frame, the wrong mat, the wrong, if this was just a single flat collage, it wouldn't have the same effect. And so how do you do that? And so I think, considering those things is always important for me. Like my own personal work, I try to, I've been working lately, I'm just going to talk about my own work as an example here because it's easy and I have it. My own work lately has been on a much smaller scale and trying to find these like quiet moments. And so letting a small piece have that quiet moment and finding the right amount of space to give it can be really great in a show, especially in a photography show where you get everything's going to be, 11 by 17. Like that's the common thing. So I think speaking to that, yes, presentation is really important. And in this show, we have a few different ways in which that's utilized really well. And also just kind of makes those pieces have a little bit more weight. Yeah.
How do you pick? A several years ago, you had a show on Instagram, and a series of 3 or 4 photographs. And the woman who took the pictures, I can't remember her name now, she photographed the in-between places, like the backs of the 7-Eleven. The front, like you're going down the street, it's lovely, but you go behind, there's little spaces, just the backs of things, in between of things. And from now on, I look for those in-between places. So that was really powerful to me, but what speaks to you and what makes you, who decides what you're going to take?
Okay, so this is kind of a curatorial aside. So when we're creating shows, so this is Identity Maps, is a juried photography show. And so what we did as a staff was kind of put together a theme that we wanted to talk about. And so this was kind of environmental portraiture of place, and how that that place can have an identity, or how that place affects your identity. And so we put a call out to the world. This is the theme. We have people submit to that. And the way this one worked, and the way many juried ones work, is we have an outside person come in and we explain the theme and they make selections from those. And so I don't have Amy's remarks, and I wish I did. But she made selections based on, she has a very photojournalistic photographic process herself. And so she kind of looked at some of these images and made selections that to her spoke to the theme. And I think in different ways too. So I think you'll find, like Graham Casano's, this is all trying to talk about the identity of the place, but there's a few other examples. See if I can find them. And this is more about how this place, this moment, is an identity to him, to Christopher Casper. And so just kind of playing with those things. Now, when I'm looking at a show and I'm trying to put something together, you look at what you have, the field, and then you're trying to make connections based on, some very obvious things like color, size, and content. So, you have this many pieces that are landscape, this many pieces that are featuring people, this many pieces that are maybe alternative. And then you also want to think about how to arrange those pieces in a way that's going to move someone through the show. So you don't want to just throw pieces on the wall. That's not all that's going to do is have someone come in and say, oh, well, I'm bored. I like this one. I don't like that one, and I'm done. So trying to find that balance between honoring each piece, but also arranging them in a way that's going to keep everyone moving. Because as a curator, I feel like it's my job to make sure that every piece that's in my care gets seen. So that's the goal, is to make sure everything gets seen. I think we got time for like one more question.
I was wondering, this is a little different, but so I was wondering about your personal opinion on how, like, Photoshop and photo editing has changed the art. Not just, adjusting the contrast, but actually editing what was taken in the photo.
I mean, so the idea of Photoshop and photo manipulation has been around for a while. So we're talking like these are photos that were edited in the darkroom. Pictorialism, the whole idea is, our artistic hand needs to be seen in the images, and that's what makes it art, right? Like, I am the artist, here's my hand in these pieces, and so that makes it more than just a straight photograph. So the idea of having photo editing abilities isn't new. I think that with any new technology and with any tool, there are great ways to use it, and then there are ways that are not going to elevate anything. And I think that's true with Photoshop and other applications. I think, are you trying to get to AI out of this? If that's where it goes. Yeah. Okay. So, I think art in general, fine art in general, is very afraid of AI right now. And I think if I can make a connection, right? So AI is a new tool that's coming into the field, and it challenges art. You know what else was a new field that came in and challenged art? Photography. And then we had to figure out how to use it and what it meant. So I think, there's always going to be this resistance to something new in the arts field, because we as artists have this idea of what is ours. This is ours, and this is how I work, and these are the tools. And if something is going to challenge that, that makes it very difficult. It's like, well, what do I do? What is my place now? What is my field's place? And so with AI, I really think that, and I'm gonna give it some years. It's gonna take a minute, but we just need to really adjust to figuring out how this tool can be used for us. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I am pretty confident that that is the way that is going to go. Anything else? All right, guys. Thanks.